How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Pei Gimel, Daf 83 of Masechta BavaBasra. Friends, Givaldik. So we're in the middle of this sugya of 3 trees and 2 trees, that thing. So we say that if Reuven buys 3 trees from Shimon's field, so then he's oichit koine the land beneath the trees, but between the trees, and also around the trees, enough for Reuven's pickers to pick in their baskets. So now the shaila is within what kind of an area, right? One tree hither, another tree yon, and another tree some other place, far away, does that count as 3 trees? What if they're mamish, right on top of each other, right next to each other? Does that count? So what exactly is this sort of space that these trees are in? And then we're going to talk about at the end of the daf, we're going to talk about, what kind of formation are they? Are they in a line? Are they a triangle? What are they? So says the Gemara. So says the Gemara on Daf Pei Beis Amud Beis, about 5 lines before it gets wide. V'chamo yehe beinein, and how much space is between the trees? One second. How much space is between the? Okay. I'm glad I checked. How much space is between the trees? Okay. I'm Rav Yosef, I'm Rav Yehuda, I'm Rav Shmuel. So it says Rav Yosef, the name of his Rebbe. Rav Yehuda says the name of his Rebbe, Shmuel. Me arba amis vad shmoina. Alright, so between 4 and 8 amis between the trees. Rav Omar, Rav Nachman, Omar Shmuel. Mishmone ve'ad sheish esrei. Between 8 and 16 amis between the trees. Amalei Abayla of Yosef, says Abayla of Yosef. Lo siflog ale du Rav Nachman. Don't argue with Rav Nachman, who says between 8 and 16. Ditnan masnisin kavose, because we have a Mishnah like Rav Nachman's position. Ditnan, that we learn in a Mishnah. Nota es karmo sheish esrei amo al sheish esrei amo. Okay, so if somebody plants rows of his vineyard with 16 amis of space in between them. Now, in order for it to be considered a vineyard, there would have to be, you can't just have, let's say this, just one row, just planting one row of grapevines is not considered a vineyard. So now, now he has multiple rows of grapevines, but in order for it to be a vineyard, how much space is allowed to be, if there's a certain amount of space between the rows, it's already considered too far away. It's not considered like it's the same vineyard. So how close do they need to be that it would be considered that these rows are being planted together and it would be able to be considered a vineyard? So again, anotea, as karmo, sheshesrei amo, sheshesrei amo. So if somebody plants his vineyard and he leaves 16 amis between each row of vines, well, that is not considered a vineyard, and therefore, muter lahavi zera l'sham, you could plant seeds there. It would not be kilei akerim, because it's not a kerim. Rabbi Yehuda, and says Rabbi Yehuda, Maise, there was episa Maise, B'Tzalmon, in a place called Tzalmon, Be'echot she'nota es karmo, a certain fellow planted his vineyard, and there were 16 amis between each row of vines. And what he would do is, so let's say there were 10 rows, okay? So rows 1, oy vavoy, how am I going to explain this? Well, let's just say he has 10 rows of vines, and he planted them east to west, right? From the east to the west, and there are 10 rows, going north-south, okay? So the southernmost row from east to west, and then a little bit north, 16 amos north of that, there's the next row going east-west. 16 amos north of that, there's another row going east-west. Okay, and what he did was the branches of the vines. So vine number 1, he faced the branches northward, and then vine number 2, he faced the branches southward. Okay, and then what he did for vine number 3, he faced the branches northward. For vine number 4, he faced the branches southward. So basically what you had was between 1 and 2, there was like this kind of all these branches, but between 2 and 3, gunished. There was nothing. It was completely clear of branches. Between 3 and 4, there were branches, but between 4 and 5, completely clear of branches. So basically, so all the branches were kind of like facing each other, but that would mean that on the right, as I said, between 1 and 2 there were branches. Between 2 and 3, it was completely clear. 16 am is completely clear. So in that place, you would be able to plant in the entirely cleared space of 16 amos. You could plant other things. It's not an issue of kilei hakerim. So again, so where am I? So Amar Rabbi Yehuda says, there was 16 amos between each row, and he would have 2 rows facing each other, but that would mean that the next row would be completely empty because the rows, so to speak, have their backs towards that space. V'zorei sanir, and that plowed area in between, he would seed the shana acheres, and then he would flip it around. The next year, and then what he would do is the next year he would basically between rows 2 and 3 would be facing each other. Between 3 and 4 would be empty. 4 and 5 would be facing each other. Between 5 and 6 would be empty. Right? He would switch off. And he would switch off planting. And this Maisa came before the Chacham. They said, Givaldig, it's fine, because since there's 16 amos between the rows, so it's not kilei hakerim. So we see that 16 amos is, so we see that 16 amos is kind of this significant thing, right? That if it's more than 16 amos, it's going to be too much. It's going to be considered too far away. Omar Le, Rav Yosef responds to Abaye, right? Because Rav Yosef had said between 4 and 8 amos. Rav Nachman had said, Rav Yosef said the name of Rav Yehuda, said the name of Shmuel, and then you had Rav who said the name of Nachman, who said the name of Shmuel. So Rav Yosef said between 4 and 8. Rav Nachman had said between 8 and 16. Abaye said to Rav Yosef, don't argue with Rav Nachman because we have a Mishnah that talks about 16. So Rav Yosef responds to Abaye, Ono lo yadaino. He says, look, I don't know. Ela uvda hava b'dor dereisa. I know that there was once a maise, an incident in Dora dereisa. But also the Talmid of Yehuda, they came before Rav Yehuda. The Omar lehu, and he said to them, Zil havlei kimlo baker v'chelav. That there was this Maisa that came, and that there was an area, there were these 3 trees, and there was less than 8 amas between them. And Rabbi Yehuda said, "V'amlei zil havlei kimlo baker v'chelav." Give him the land. Even if there's only between them kimlo baker v'chelav, this land, right? Give him the trees and the land beneath it. And between them, and I didn't know what does it mean exactly. Came in the Shmaita leha detnan, but when I learned the following Mishnah, a person should not plant his tree next to his friend's field. He's got to leave 4 amas space, a buffer. We talked about Dalar Amas, that those 4 amas are enough space of avodas hakerim to work a vineyard. Amina, so I said, shmaminikim le bakav v'chelev dalar amas, that it must be that malo bakav v'chelev is dalar amas. Okay, so therefore Rav Yosef understood that even between 4 and 8 amas would be a shaykh for this shear of the 3 trees. Okay. Rav Yosef Milo Tanan, but don't we also have a brisa like Rav Yosef? Meaning, Rav Nachman had said between 8 and 16. Abaye comes and he says, well, we have a Mishnah supporting Rav Nachman. Rav Yosef said between 4 and 8. So Rav Nachman had said between 8 and 16. Rav Yosef said between 4 and 8. But don't we also have a Mishnah supporting that between 4 and 8? V'atanan Reb Meir, Reb Shimon Omrim, Reb Meir, Reb Shimon say, Hanoteya es karmo shmone ames al shmone muter lo vizer l'sham. That the Mishnah says, Kilayin Perek Dal Mishnah Test, is that the same Mishnah? No. Dal, yeah, it's the same Mishnah. That Reb Meir and Reb Shimon say, Hanoteya es karmo shmone ames al shmone ames, that if there's 8 ames between each row, muter lo vizer l'sham, you could plant other things there, and it's not Kilei HaKerem, i.e., 8 ames is already enough for it to be considered too far. So we have a Mishnah supporting Rav Yosef as well. So afilu hachi ma'isa adaf, but still the ratio of that Mishnah, where we said 16 ames, that is preferable because there was a story there, a real lie. The Mishnah had quoted a real actual story where somebody had a vineyard with 16 ames, and they came for the Chachamim. So therefore, if there was like a real life event that happened, and that's how it was paskind, so that is preferable. And therefore, that is why Abai says to Rav Yosef that don't argue with Rav Nachman, because we have a Mishnah supporting Rav Nachman. B'shlamim Rav Yosef, aliba de Rav Shimon. So now I understand Rav Yosef's view. According to Rav Shimon, we learned both the minimum and the maximum. Right, the maximum. Let's go weiter. Mifuzar and Adamar, as we just said, right? The Rav Meir and Rav Shimon say that by a vineyard it's 8 ames. Right, so Rav Yosef had said between 4 and 8 ames. So we see the maximum that Rav Yosef, based on Rav Shimon, they're saying that the maximum space between the trees would be 8 ames. Ritzufin d'Tanan, and we also know that Rav Shimon's opinion for the minimum is it's not Keramanatua al Pochis Midalad Amis Eno Kerem. The Reb Shimon says Reb Shimon that if a vineyard has less than 4 amas between the rows, it is not considered a vineyard. So we see Reb Shimon's minimum of 4, Reb Shimon's maximum of 8. So I get it that according to Reb Yosef, who's going based on Reb Shimon, I see his 4 and I see his 8. The Chacham argue Reb Shimon, and they say that if you have a vineyard where there's less than 4 amas between the rows, it's no problem because we'll just pretend like every other row is invisible, so therefore then there is 4 amas between each row. So according to Rav Yosef, is going based on Reb Shimon, so I get 4 and 8. There's a Mishnah for each. But according to Rav Nachman, who's going based on the Rabbanan, so we saw 16, the maximum amount of space, but we didn't see the minimum space of 8 amas. So Svaru midil Shimon Pago the Rabbanan Nami Pago. Well, we could say it's a Svara that, well, if we look at Reb Shimon's, his maximum was 8, his minimum was 4. Well, then if we're going to go, that was Reb Shimon and Rav Yosef. Well, then Rav Nachman Oichit, who says 16, so Memele, that's the maximum, what's the minimum? Half, just like Rav Yosef was half, 8 and 4. So Rav Nachman Oichit, 16 and 8. Omarava says, Rava Hilchisa, what's the halacha? Drum roll, please. May arbe ames v'ad shesha esrei, from between 4 and 16. So Rav Yosef said 4 and 8. Rav Nachman said 8 and 16. Says Rava, the halacha is taka between 4 and 16. If there are anywhere between 4 amas and 16 amas between the trees, well then you can do, the 3 tree thing and the land between it. But less than 4 amas between them or more than 16 amas, nisht. Tani Kavasa Rava, we talk about a price supporting Rava. Kamayu Mekorovin Arba Amis. What is the minimum amount? 4 Amis. V'Kamayu Meruchakin. What is the maximum amount? Sheshasrei, 16. Hariza Kona Karka. So then you would be, in that case, between 4 and 16, you would be Kone, the land beneath the trees. Vesa Ilonis Shabenein. And the area between the trees and the tree and any trees that are between the trees that you're buying. The Fichach Yovesha Ilon. Oniktzatz, therefore, because he's buying not just the trees, but oichet the land, so if the tree gets dried out, or if it gets cut down, no problem. He owns the land beneath it. Yesh lo karka. He owns the land, he could plant new ones. Pachos mikano yosu alkein, but less than 4 amis, so more than 16 amis. Where am I? Pachos mikano yosu alkan. Or he acquired the trees one at a time. Lo kona es akarka velo es ilana shebene, and he's not kona the karka and not any trees in between them. Lefichach yovash ilana niktzatz ein lo karka. Therefore, if the tree gets dried out or gets cut down and it dies, meaning it gets dried out and dies or gets cut down, so he doesn't own any of the property and therefore he can't replant it. But Rabbi Yirmiyah asks akashik shu moded. When he's measuring, is it 4 amas, 16 amas, right? Where is he measuring from? From the bottom of the trunk where it's thickest? From the top of the trunk where it's thinnest? Where is he measuring from? Says Ravashi. Toshma, come here. Alright, I'm not exactly sure what this means. I think what it means is that if you graft a grapevine by taking an older grapevine and then taking a young vine and you stick it into the old vine, and now that young vine, so if you're measuring like how far it is from the next vine in terms of being a vineyard, so where are you measuring from? From like the part, I think what it's saying is from the part where it's stuck into the old vine, or is maybe the other end of the branch of the vine, or maybe somewhere in the middle. So we're saying Me'ikra Asheni from like the second stump, I think like somewhere in the middle is the point. So therefore, if you are measuring between these trees to figure out is it 4 amas or 16 amas, whatever it is, so you would measure from the middle of the stump. Alright? By Rabbi Yirmiyah asks, Machar lo shlosha bade ilon mau. If he sells 3, apparently the word is bowls. If you have one tree that has like 3 kind of like tree looking thing, meaning from an outside perspective it looks like 3 trees, it happens to be that they're all connected underground. So if you have shlosha badilun, so basically these 3 what looks like trees, but it happens to be that they're all connected underground. Mao, do we treat them like 3 trees and you're also kona the karka, or is it 1 tree and you're not kona karka? Omele Rav Gvir mi beikosu the Ravashi Tashma Kamnir. That if you're mavrich 3 gifonim, so you have like 3 grapevines, and you take the vine and you like bend it without cutting it, you like bend it and stick it in back into the ground and out again or something, and then that way it re-roots. Like in the middle of the vine, it's like, which is under, and like part of it, like, so like bend it and stick part of it underground. The part that's underground can like re-root. So there's not a mavir gimel gefonim ve'krein nirin, and you can like, it looks like there's like new roots from, even though they're all still connected, but it looks as if there's like 2 separate vines. So Reb Elazar Reb Tzadok Omer, im yesh benein midalet ames vad shmone mitztarfin. Well, if between the 2 quote unquote vines, which are really the same vine, but they look like they're different vines, well then we're treating them like separate vines, and if there's between 4 and 8 amas mitzdarfin, we could join them as a vineyard. V'im lav lo mitzdarfin. If not, they're not. So even though they're still connected, we view them separately. And therefore, here also, when you have these what looks like 3 trees, even though they're still connected, they're connected at the bottom. We would treat them as 3 separate trees. What if Shimon sells Reuven 2 in his field and 1 on the border? Or if Shimon sells Reuven 2 trees in his field, and then if he owns like a tree in his neighbor's field, but he sells that also, teku. Rashi asks, Bor ma'u shetafsik. What if you have a pit between the trees? Is that a hefsik? Amasamai ma'u shetafsik. What if you have like a body of water between them? Channel of water. Rishus harabma. What if you have Rishus harabma between the trees? Richba dedikla, or a hedge of palms. Ma'u teku. Ich weiß nicht. But Mine Hillel me Rebbe. Hillel asked Rebbe. Now, obviously, this is not Hillel Hazokin, who was Rebbe's father, grandfather, great-grandfather, great-great-grandfather, great-great-great-grand. I think Hillel was Rebbe's great-great-great-great-grandfather, right? Meaning Rebbe's father was Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, whose father was Rabbi Gamliel, whose father was Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, whose father was Rabbi Gamliel, whose father was Shimon, whose father was Hillel. So that's 6 generations. So you have father, grandfather, great-grandfather, great-great-grandfather, great-great-great-grandfather. Yeah, I think great-great-great-great-grandfather, I think was Hillel. So obviously Hillel's great-great-great-great-grandfather was not asking him kashas. Rebbe was not asking him kashas. So, but mine Hillel me Rebbe, Allah eres b'nein ma'u. What if a cedar grew between the trees? Is it a hefsek? Allah. What do you mean if it grew? That means that at the time of the sale, it wasn't there. So obviously he was kona the karka. We're not going to take away the karka because a cedar grew there. So b'shuz adidei nafak. The cedar is coming up while Reuven already owns the land. So Ella hoya eres b'nein ma'u. What if there was a big cedar tree? Is that a hefsek? Amalei kona v'kona. Rebbe says it's no hefsek. No, he's going to be kona the karka. Ketzad in omdin. What is the formation in which the trees are? Rav Amar Kishur, Shmuel Amar Kichatzuva. Rav says they're in a row, or really they are even in a row. Shmuel says they are in a triangle. Mandamar Kishura, Kol Shekin Kichatzuva. Rav says that even if they are in a row, they are he's still kona the karka. Certainly, if they are in a triangle, you would be kona the karka. Mandamar Kichatzuva. Shmuel who says that it's in a triangle. It's specifically in a triangle. About Kishura, but if they are in a row, low, then he would not be kona the karka. My time mishum mizdera ben tayu, because it's when they're in a row, it's easy for Shimon to plant between the trees, and therefore he will retain them. But if they're in a triangle, it is difficult for him to be able to plant in between the trees, and therefore he will not retain them. Maskeflo Rav Amnuna asakashu l'mandamer kichatzuva. My time. So Shmuel who says that specifically in a triangle. So how come Reuven is kona the karka? Because it's too difficult for Shimon to plant between the trees. Dilo mizdor ben tayu is because Shimon's going to not plant between the trees. Elamiato zoven le tlos hege rom yosa. So according to Shmuel, what if you have 3 thorn bushes, but they're in a row? Dilo mizdor ben tayu. Hachinami diesh lo karka. So would Shmuel say that? So Shmuel said specifically they're in a triangle, not if they're in a row, because it's easy for him to work the field between those trees, so Shimon will keep it for himself. But what if there were thorn bushes? Would Shmuel say that those are sold? Right there. That Reuven would be kona the karka because it's too difficult for Shimon to plow there. So Amar le'hanach lo chshive anach shive. To which Shmuel says that don't ask me kashas from thorn bushes. Thorn bushes are like not very desirable bushes. They're not important enough, not choshev enough that the land would be sold together with the bush. So it's just kind of out of the question. Okay. Well, that was the Pegimel of BavaBasra. We learned about these 3 trees and what was the area between the trees that would allow them to be considered. This land is sold together with the trees. And we saw machlokas between Rav Yosef and Rav Nachman. Rav Yosef says between 4 and 8 amas between the trees. Rav Nachman says between 8 and 16 amas. Rav Paskin that it's between 4 and 16 amas. We also then at the end talked about the formation of the trees. Rav says they can even be in a row, and that's fine. Reuben would be kona the karka. Shmuel says dafka in a triangle, but not in a row. Peace out.